What I'm about to show you may completely change the way you look at your blood pressure monitor. Because if you are over 60, the most dangerous blood pressure is probably not the one you've been taught to fear the most. And when I reveal the number that quietly puts thousands of seniors on a path toward stroke, heart failure, memory decline, and emergency hospitalization, you're going to understand why so many older adults feel reassured by readings that are actually warning signs. This is one of the most misunderstood topics in all of senior health, and misunderstanding it can cost you years you thought you still had. Right now, somewhere, a senior is staring at a reading like 168/72 and feeling calm because the bottom number looks fine. Somewhere else, another senior is seeing 124/58 and feeling proud because the top number looks controlled. And in both cases, danger may already be building. That's the part almost no one explains clearly. Blood pressure is not just about whether a number is high or low. It's about which number is changing, why it is changing, what age does to your arteries, and what pattern in those two numbers tells the real story about your risk. I'm Dr. Aliza Wright, and before we go one step further, subscribe now for clear, life-saving senior health guidance that helps you avoid dangerous mistakes, protect your heart, and stay independent. Because by the end of this video, you're going to know 3 things with absolute clarity. First, which blood pressure number usually becomes more dangerous after age 60. Second, which blood pressure pattern sends too many seniors into a false sense of security. And third, which reading means you should stop everything and seek emergency help right away. And I need you to stay with me, because the answer is not as simple as top number good, bottom number bad, or the other way around. In seniors, the danger changes shape, and that's exactly why so many people miss it. Let me start with Martha, because her story shows you how this confusion becomes dangerous in real life. Martha was 71, careful, organized, and incredibly proud of how closely she followed her doctor's advice. Every morning, she took her blood pressure and wrote it down in a small notebook beside her coffee mug. For weeks, her readings looked like this: 162/74, 166/70, 164/72. She kept telling herself the bottom number isn't bad, so maybe this isn't serious. After all, she felt mostly fine, a little tired, slightly breathless climbing stairs, but nothing that sounded like an emergency. Then one afternoon, Martha was folding laundry when her right hand suddenly felt weak. Her speech became thick for 30 seconds, then normal again. It passed so quickly she almost ignored it. But what she had experienced was a transient ischemic attack, a warning stroke. And the reading pattern she had been dismissing, that repeatedly high top number with a seemingly acceptable bottom number, had been telling the truth the whole time. Martha did not have harmless blood pressure. She had one of the most common and dangerous patterns seen in older adults, and she had mistaken it for something mild simply because no one explained what mattered most. To understand why this happens, you need to understand what those two numbers actually mean. The top number, systolic pressure, is the pressure in your arteries when your heart squeezes and pushes blood forward. The bottom number, diastolic pressure, is the pressure in your arteries when your heart relaxes between beats. Both matter, both can become dangerous, but after age 60, the top number usually begins telling a much more important story about long-term risk than most people realize. And that shift happens because the body you had at 35 is not the body measuring blood pressure at 65, 75, or 85. When you are younger, your large arteries are more elastic. They stretch when the heart pumps and help soften the force of blood moving through them. But as you age, those arteries slowly become stiffer. They do not expand as easily. They do not cushion pressure as well. So when the heart beats, the pressure wave hits harder and rises higher. That pushes the systolic number upward. The bottom number may stay normal or even drift lower. And that exact pattern, high top number with normal or lower bottom number, becomes extremely common in older adults. It even has a name: isolated systolic hypertension. Now here's the part that can save your life. If you are over 60 and you are asking which blood pressure is most dangerous most of the time, the answer is usually the top number, the systolic number, especially when it remains elevated over and over again. Not because the bottom number stops mattering, but because in older adults, the systolic number often becomes the strongest visible sign of artery stiffness, stroke risk, heart strain, and vascular damage. This is why a reading like 158/76 can be far more dangerous than many seniors think, even though that bottom number does not look dramatic. Let me tell you about Robert, 68, because his story reveals how deceptive this can be. Robert was a retired contractor, active, strong, and the kind of man who believed he would know if something serious was wrong. His readings at home were often 154/78, sometimes 160/80, sometimes 157/76. He shrugged them off for months because he had one idea stuck in his head. If the bottom number isn't high, it can't be that bad. That belief delayed treatment long enough for his heart to begin thickening from the extra pressure it was pumping against every single day. This is why isolated systolic hypertension is so dangerous. It is quiet, it is common, and it looks less alarming than it really is. Seniors often see a bottom number under 80 and assume the reading is balanced, maybe even acceptable. But what that top number may really be telling you is that the arteries have stiffened, the heart is working harder, the brain's small blood vessels are under more pressure, and the risk of stroke is climbing. The danger is not loud. It doesn't always announce itself with pain. It slowly damages the organs you depend on most until one day the consequences are impossible to ignore. And yet, I need to slow you down for a second, because if I stopped here, the message would still be incomplete. The top number is usually the most important long-term danger signal after 60, yes. But the single most immediately dangerous blood pressure reading is not just a high top number. It is a severely elevated reading, usually above 180 systolic and/or above 120 diastolic, especially if it comes with warning symptoms. That is where confusion turns into emergency territory. That is where this stops being a conversation about risk over years and becomes a conversation about danger right now. Let me tell you about Rose. Rose was 73 and had always been nervous about checking her blood pressure. One morning, she felt a pounding headache behind her eyes. She sat down at the kitchen table, wrapped the cuff around her arm, and got 186/118. She waited 2 minutes and checked again. 192/121. Then came the symptom that changed everything: blurry vision in her left eye. This was not a harmless spike. This was not a number to watch until tomorrow. This was the kind of reading that can signal a hypertensive emergency where the brain, heart, kidneys, or blood vessels may already be in danger. So I need to say this clearly. If blood pressure is above 180/120 and there is chest pain, shortness of breath, back pain, weakness, numbness, confusion, vision change, or trouble speaking, that is not a wait-and-see situation. That is emergency territory. That is when you seek urgent medical help immediately. Too many seniors make the mistake of treating these readings like weather reports, something to monitor and discuss later. But blood pressure at that level, with symptoms, can be the setup for stroke, heart attack, aortic injury, kidney damage, or other life-threatening problems unfolding in real time. Now here's the twist that catches so many older adults off guard. A very high diastolic number can absolutely be dangerous, especially when it goes above 120 in a crisis. But outside of that emergency scenario, in seniors over 60, the bottom number often stops being the main problem and the top number becomes the bigger issue. That's why so many doctors pay special attention to systolic pressure in older adults. Not because diastolic pressure is meaningless, but because aging changes the pattern of hypertension. The danger shifts upward, and most people never realize the rules changed as they got older. Let me show you how this plays out in real life with Leonard. Leonard was 76, disciplined, and serious about following instructions. His blood pressure log looked organized and impressive. Every morning, 158/68. Every evening, 162/70. On paper, he thought he was doing all right because he had spent decades hearing that the bottom number was the important one. And his bottom number stayed under 80 almost every time. What he did not know was that his pulse pressure, the gap between the top and bottom numbers, was getting wider and wider, and that gap was telling an even more troubling story. Pulse pressure is simply the difference between the top and bottom numbers. If your blood pressure is 160 over 70, your pulse pressure is 90. If it's 150 over 80, your pulse pressure is 70. As people age, a widening pulse pressure often reflects stiffer arteries. And that matters because the wider that gap becomes, the more it can signal extra strain on the cardiovascular system. In plain English, the heart is pumping into blood vessels that no longer absorb force the way they used to. So the top number rises, the bottom number may fall, and the entire system becomes less forgiving. This is why a senior can look at 166 over 62 and miss the real danger completely. The eye goes straight to the 62 and thinks, well, at least it's not high. But that wide spread between 166 and 62 may actually be screaming that the arteries are aging under pressure, that circulation is becoming less efficient, and that the heart and brain are paying the price. It is one of the most deceptive patterns in senior blood pressure. Not dramatic enough to scare you instantly, but dangerous enough to quietly raise the risk of stroke, heart disease, kidney injury, and physical decline. Let me tell you about Helen, because her story reveals why that wide gap matters so much. Helen was 80, sharp as a tack, independent, still driving herself to church and grocery shopping every week. Her readings had changed over the years from 138 over 82 to 152 over 74 to 164 over 60. She kept focusing on the bottom number dropping and assumed that meant improvement. In her mind, lower had to mean better. But what was really happening was not improvement. Her arteries were getting stiffer, her systolic pressure was climbing, and the widening pulse pressure was becoming a clearer marker of cardiovascular risk. Then came the fatigue. Then the shortness of breath walking from the parking lot. Then the afternoon dizziness that made her start using furniture for balance. Helen thought she was just slowing down. But when her blood pressure pattern was evaluated properly, the issue became clear. She had persistent systolic hypertension with a wide pulse pressure, and her heart had been working against that extra strain for far longer than she knew. The monitor had been telling the truth, but she was reading the wrong part of the message. She thought the lower number was comforting her when the higher number was warning her. But now we need to talk about something that almost no one expects to hear in a blood pressure video. Sometimes the most dangerous number is not the high one. Sometimes it is the bottom number dropping too low. And this is where seniors get pulled into a completely different kind of danger. Because after 60, especially if you are taking blood pressure medication, it is possible to lower the bottom number so much that the heart itself may not be getting ideal blood flow between beats. This is the part of the story most people never hear, and it can be just as important. Let me tell you about Arthur, 74. Arthur had worked hard to get his top number down. He changed his diet, lost weight, started walking every day, and faithfully took every medication he was prescribed. His blood pressure improved, but then he started feeling strange. Lightheaded when he stood up, weak during his morning shower, unsteady in the grocery store. His readings looked like this: 126 over 56, 122 over 54, 128 over 58. He thought he should feel proud. Instead, he felt awful. What no one had explained to Arthur was that lowering blood pressure too aggressively can create a new problem in some seniors. Here's why. The coronary arteries, the arteries that feed the heart muscle itself, receive much of their blood flow during diastole, during that resting phase between beats. So if the diastolic pressure drops too low, especially in an older person whose arteries may already be narrowed or stiff, blood flow to the heart muscle can become less ideal. That does not mean everyone with a diastolic in the high 50s is in danger. It means context matters. And in seniors, a bottom number under about 60, especially with symptoms like dizziness, weakness, or falls, deserves real attention rather than automatic celebration. This is where the blood pressure conversation becomes more mature, more nuanced, and frankly, more honest, because the internet loves simple answers. It wants one villain. It wants someone to say the top number is always the problem, or the bottom number is always the problem. But real life is not that neat. In seniors over 60, the top number is usually the more dangerous long-term signal. A very high reading is the most immediately dangerous emergency pattern. And a bottom number that falls too low, especially while the top number is still elevated or symptoms are present, becomes a different kind of trap entirely. So if you are asking me, doctor to patient, which blood pressure is most dangerous for seniors over 60, here is the honest answer. The most commonly dangerous pattern is a high systolic number, the top number, especially when it stays above 140 repeatedly or rises much higher. The most immediately dangerous pattern is blood pressure above 180 over 120 with warning symptoms. And the most deceptive pattern may be high systolic pressure paired with low diastolic pressure, creating a wide pulse pressure. That combination can fool seniors into thinking one number cancels out the other when it absolutely does not. Now let me make this painfully practical, because this is where you start protecting yourself. If your readings are often in the 140s, 150s, or 160s on top, even with a bottom number under 80, do not tell yourself it's fine just because the lower number is decent. That is exactly how isolated systolic hypertension hides in plain sight. If your reading shoots above 180 over 120 and you feel chest pain, weakness, severe headache, confusion, trouble breathing, or vision change, do not argue with the monitor. Treat that like the emergency it may be until a professional tells you otherwise. And if your diastolic number, the bottom one, starts falling into the 50s or low 60s, especially after medication changes, you need to pay attention to how you feel. Are you dizzy when you stand? Are you weak in the shower? Do you feel foggy, faint, or unstable? Have you nearly fallen? Those symptoms matter. The number never exists by itself. Your body is part of the reading. That is why a blood pressure value that looks excellent on paper can still be wrong for you if it leaves you unsteady, exhausted, or unable to function safely in your everyday life. Let me tell you about Nancy, because her story ties all of this together. Nancy was 69 and terrified of stroke because her mother had one at 72. So she monitored her blood pressure relentlessly. When she saw 148 over 64, she panicked about the 148. When she later saw 122 over 58 after a medication adjustment, she relaxed. Then the dizziness started. She assumed it was stress. But what she was actually experiencing was the dangerous middle ground many seniors fall into. Treatment had lowered her bottom number too far, while her circulation still wasn't making her feel well. The numbers had changed, but balance had not been restored. And that word balance is everything here. Good blood pressure management in seniors is not about crushing the numbers at any cost. It is about reducing risk while preserving blood flow, stability, energy, brain function, and independence. It is about protecting the heart without starving the heart, protecting the brain without making you too dizzy to stand safely. That's why blood pressure after 60 requires more nuance than younger adults often need. The goal is not just lower. The goal is safer. And safer depends on pattern, symptoms, consistency, and how your body is responding to treatment over time. There's another reason the top number becomes so important after 60, and it has to do with the brain. High systolic pressure exposes the small vessels in the brain to repeated stress. Over time, that can contribute to stroke risk, but it may also affect thinking, memory, and overall brain health. This is one reason high blood pressure is so often called a silent killer. It does damage quietly, day by day, without always producing warning symptoms you can feel. By the time the consequences appear, the process may have been underway for years. That's why repeated systolic elevation deserves respect even when you feel normal. And let's talk about the feeling normal part, because this is where seniors lose precious time. You cannot rely on symptoms to tell you whether your blood pressure is dangerous. Plenty of seniors walk around with systolic numbers in the 150s or 160s and feel completely ordinary. No headache, no chest pain, no obvious distress. The body adapts just enough to keep the danger hidden. That is why a calm day does not mean a safe reading. Blood pressure isn't judged by how dramatic it feels. It is judged by what it is doing to your arteries, heart, brain, kidneys, and circulation over time. Now I want to address one of the most common misunderstandings I hear. A senior will say, "Doctor, my top number is high, but my bottom number is low, so don't they sort of balance out?" No, they do not balance out. That is one of the most dangerous myths in blood pressure management after 60. A high systolic number can still be risky even if the diastolic is normal or low. And a low diastolic number can still be concerning even if the systolic looks improved. One number does not cancel the other.